There was a moment when Shania Twain realized something was wrong. Not wrong in the loud, obvious way people expect. Not betrayal exposed under bright lights. Not screaming, not chaos. It was quieter than that. She once described the feeling as standing beside someone who looked familiar, but emotionally felt absent, like the soul had quietly left the room while the body remained. For years, Shania had trusted one man completely, her husband and producer, Robert "Mutt" Lang. He helped build her career, helped shape her sound, helped construct the life she believed was safe. Then, one day, the illusion collapsed. Her husband had been having an affair with her closest friend. And what shattered Shania wasn't only betrayal, it was the psychological disorientation that followed. Because people who manipulate emotionally rarely destroy you all at once. They destabilize your internal reality gradually. In psychology, this is connected to something called trauma bonding, a deep emotional attachment formed through cycles of affection, confusion, validation, withdrawal, and intermittent reinforcement. The brain becomes addicted to unpredictability. One day warmth, one day distance, one day intimacy, one day emotional punishment. And slowly, the nervous system stops asking, "Is this healthy?" It starts asking, "How do I get the warmth back?" That is the trap. But what makes this story extraordinary is not the betrayal. It's what happened after. Because eventually, Shania stopped chasing explanations, stopped begging for emotional clarity, stopped trying to repair someone determined to fracture her. And the moment she emotionally detached, the dynamic changed completely. That is the moment many narcissistic personalities fear more than anything. Not your anger, not your sadness, your emotional independence. Because once your nervous system no longer revolves around them, their power begins collapsing in real time. And that is where the final psychological trick usually begins. Not rage, not cruelty, performance. Amber Heard and Johnny Depp's relationship became one of the most publicly dissected emotional dynamics in modern celebrity culture. And regardless of which side people took legally or emotionally, psychologists, behavioral analysts, and communication experts noticed something deeply important beneath the headlines. The relationship appeared trapped in a cycle of emotional escalation, identity instability, reactive conflict, and psychological power struggles. One person withdraws, the other intensifies. One seeks control through silence. The other seeks control through emotional activation. Then the roles reverse. This is often associated with what clinicians describe as attachment dysregulation, when unresolved emotional wounds begin shaping relational behavior unconsciously. And one of the darkest aspects of these dynamics is this. The relationship stops being about love. It becomes about regulation. Who controls the emotional temperature? Who determines closeness? Who destabilizes whom first? During the collapse of the relationship, something fascinating happened publicly. Both sides attempted to reclaim narrative control. Why? Because for psychologically controlling personalities, perception is power. If they lose control privately, they often attempt to regain control socially. This is connected to what psychology calls impression management, the strategic shaping of how others perceive you in order to maintain status, validation, or influence. And this becomes especially dangerous after separation. Many people think toxic personalities simply move on. Often they don't. Often they monitor, observe, test boundaries indirectly. Suddenly mutual friends change behavior. Old memories reappear. Unexpected kindness emerges. Cryptic messages surface online. None of it looks aggressive. That's the point. Because sophisticated emotional manipulation rarely looks like manipulation. It looks like coincidence, like vulnerability, like personal growth. And this is where many survivors become confused. Because the manipulator returns wearing the exact emotional costume the victim once begged to see. Softness, self-awareness, reflection, emotional language. But genuine accountability creates peace. Performance creates pressure. That distinction changes everything. A genuinely transformed person respects boundaries even if those boundaries hurt them. A manipulative person respects boundaries only long enough to regain access. And the moment access is restored, the old architecture quietly returns. Different words, same emotional gravity. Princess Diana understood this dynamic long before most people had language for it. What made Diana psychologically fascinating wasn't merely her fame. It was the emotional contradiction she represented. She was one of the most admired women on earth, while simultaneously feeling profoundly unseen inside her marriage. And over time, something changed in her publicly. In the early years, she appeared eager for approval, careful, adaptable, emotionally accommodating. But later, the emotional energy shifted. She became more grounded, more direct, more emotionally autonomous. You could hear it in interviews, see it in posture, feel it in presence. And psychologically, this transformation matters deeply, because controlling dynamics survive on one essential condition. Your self-concept must remain unstable. If you constantly question yourself, you remain influenceable. But once someone develops internal clarity, manipulation becomes dramatically less effective. This is why emotionally controlling personalities often react strongly when their target begins healing. Not because healing harms them, because healing removes leverage. Diana eventually stopped performing emotional obedience for public comfort, and the world noticed. But something else happens psychologically when a person reclaims themselves after years of emotional suppression. Their nervous system changes. Research connected to complex trauma recovery shows that survivors eventually develop heightened pattern recognition, not paranoia, discernment. They begin noticing inconsistencies faster, reading tone shifts faster, detecting emotional coercion faster. And suddenly, what once felt confusing becomes painfully obvious. The charm feels rehearsed, the apology feels strategic, the affection feels timed. Because once clarity arrives, manipulation loses its invisibility. That is why many narcissistic personalities panic during the final stage of separation. The illusion no longer functions automatically. They now have to work for emotional access, and exhausting performance eventually cracks. This is why the final tactic often becomes psychological inversion. They begin reframing your boundaries as cruelty, your caution as paranoia, your emotional intelligence as inability to trust. In psychology, this overlaps with a defense mechanism called projection. When someone relocates internal dysfunction onto another person to avoid confronting themselves, and if you spent years being emotionally conditioned to self-doubt, this tactic can be devastatingly effective, because suddenly you are defending your sanity to the very person who destabilized it. That is the trap. Not physical return, psychological reentry. Here is what many people never fully understand about narcissistic dynamics. The narcissist does not fear your hatred nearly as much as your indifference. Hatred still contains emotional attachment. Indifference means the emotional ecosystem collapsed completely. No obsession, no chasing, no need for closure, just clarity. And clarity is terrifying to manipulative personalities because clarity cannot be negotiated with emotionally. Once you genuinely see the pattern, the nervous system stops romanticizing the pain. That is why many survivors describe healing not as becoming stronger, but becoming quieter internally. The emotional storms stop. The constant hyperanalysis stops. You no longer rehearse imaginary conversations at 2 a.m. You no longer crave validation from the person who harmed you. And most importantly, You stop confusing emotional intensity with love. That realization changes lives. Because toxic attachment often feels deeper than healthy love, precisely because instability activates survival chemistry: dopamine, cortisol, adrenaline. The relationship feels powerful because the nervous system is trapped in threat-reward cycling. But healthy love regulates. It does not destabilize. It does not require emotional exhaustion to feel meaningful. And one of the saddest truths many survivors eventually face is this: they were not addicted to the person. They were addicted to hope. Hope that one day the emotionally unavailable person would finally become emotionally safe. Hope that the inconsistency would transform into certainty. Hope that pain would eventually justify itself with reward. But unresolved hope can imprison people for decades, especially empathetic people, especially deeply loyal people, especially people who believe love means enduring suffering gracefully. And this is why emotional discernment matters more than emotional intensity, because the most dangerous manipulator is rarely the loudest one. Often, it is the one who studies your wounds carefully enough to sound like healing. The final trick only works if part of you still believes your value must be earned through emotional endurance. But the moment you understand that real love does not require psychological survival tactics, the illusion begins collapsing permanently. And that is why people who truly heal often become almost unrecognizable emotionally. Not colder, not bitter, just internally anchored. They stop reacting to bait, stop explaining boundaries endlessly. Stop trying to convince emotionally committed manipulators to become self-aware. Because one of the hardest psychological truths adulthood teaches is this: understanding someone's wounds does not obligate you to surrender your peace to them. And the strongest people are often not the loudest ones. They are the people who quietly refuse to abandon themselves anymore. That quietness, that internal stillness, that ability to remain emotionally grounded in the presence of someone who once controlled your entire nervous system, that is freedom. And manipulative personalities recognize that freedom instantly, because it is the one thing they cannot manufacture convincingly for long. Their identity is performance. Yours became real through suffering, reflection, and rebuilding. And deep down, they know the difference. If this video spoke to something you've lived, then you already understand that some psychological truths change you permanently once you see them clearly. Subscribe now for more deep psychological analysis, human behavior, emotional intelligence, dark psychology, and the hidden dynamics that shape relationships, identity, and power. Because the moment you truly understand the game, you stop being controlled by it. What women think, they rarely say out loud. The video now on your screen reveals how women truly see men: attraction, attention, respect, and emotional psychology. Watch now, how women think about men. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.